the whole idea of having the cave as a state park is to preserve it. And my vision for the property from the very beginning was a state park vision. My father, as I said, is a minister in southern West Virginia. We lived in a little town called Bramwell, the very southern bottom of West Virginia. And outside there was a place called Pinnacle Rock State Park. And we'd go up there. There's a big rock we used to climb at. And they had all the picnic shelter there and the tables. It was very rustic and very nice. So we started doing the development of Laurel Caverns. I was coming out of that environment there. And I just saw the property sort of lending itself to being like a state park, not being a state park. That was my vision for it.
Imagine a place where stress fades, fresh air fills your lungs, and adventure awaits around every corner. Welcome to Think Outside, the podcast that inspires you to explore, connect, and embrace the outdoors. Hi, welcome to Think Outside with the Pennsylvania Parks and Forests Foundation. I'm your host, Marci Mowery, and today our guest is David Cale. He is the owner of Laurel Caverns. And by the time this airs, Laurel Caverns will be park number 125 in the state park system because of Mr. Cale. And we're really excited to learn about his history with Laurel Caverns and some of the stories that he has to share with us. So welcome, David. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
So, you've been involved with Laurel Caverns for a very long time. So can you share with our listeners your earliest memory of Laurel Caverns and how did your relationship with the caverns begin?
Well, it began because my grandfather bought all the land around here in about 1926. So by the time I came along, it was called Delaney's Cave. And my grandfather, we all always came up on a Sunday afternoon. And it was already a very popular tourist destination. It was just a wild cave. It had accumulated its own following of people like the Pittsburgh Explorers Club and people like that came up every weekend. And it was typically, the family would drive up there on a Sunday, usually a Sunday afternoon after church, go there. And that crowd in the summertime, in the wintertime, no. But the same crowd would always be there. And they would be, had tents and they would camp over the weekend. And some of them people would come exploring and other people just came in and went exploring. And that was the way the place was in those days. So my earliest memory would have been about the time when I was maybe first grade, second grade. I decided to go down into the cave by myself.
Ooh.
Yes. And I grabbed a flashlight and off I went. And I've been down there with my dad a few times. And I wasn't afraid of the cave, but I was afraid of people. And I go into what we now call the Hall of the Mountain King. And that gets where it gets its name. And I got down in there and there's a spring in that cave and water in the distance of the cave sounds like voices. When people would get lost and they would sit there in the darkness, they would hear the water and they would think people were coming. They were here, but it was just the water of the spring. It's the stream. The water does that. So I thought people were in the cave. So I turned around and I started working my way back up. And it wasn't an easy walk in those days, but I was scrambling out of there to get back because I thought people were down there. Later on, always remembering that, I heard a piece of music by Grieg in which Grieg depicts a young boy, Peer Gynt, who's inside a mountain, which is inhabited by the Mountain King. And as he walks along, he keeps imagining this giant is behind him. And so he starts walking faster and faster and faster. And of course, Grieg depicts that in that very familiar piece of music. Bum, 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 bum.
Oh, yes.
Faster and faster and faster. And so that is why I named that passage the Hall of the Mountain King.
I love that. And for perspective, you're a child, you're going down into the caverns. What is the size of the cavern? So for people who haven't been there, like what were you undertaking on that expedition?
We have right now 4 miles of cave. We did not have that much cave in those days because one of my projects in life was to keep opening up and finding new cave where no one's ever been. I started that when I was 15 years old. I started a dig that eventually led to what they nicely named the Cale's Canyon. I didn't name it that, but the staff did. It was a breakthrough into a large section of cave, had quite a bit. And we found that by digging out the level passage, we can get into larger dip passages. Think about the rock bed slopes down the mountain. And it's
Okay.
very steep. Where the stream comes out, we have several streams come together in the cave, where the last stream comes out on the mountain, to give you an idea of the distance and the slope, if we were to put the Washington Monument on where the stream comes out,
Okay.
and then at our visitor center, which is up at the entrance, standing on the balcony of our visitor center, we would be looking down on top of the monument.
Oh, my.
We're higher than, that's the idea of the elevation difference.
Yes.
So the cave now slopes and streams tend to run downhill, and the passages would be that we have open, flushes the sand out of those passages. But the cross passages tended to be not that way. So the art of the game in finding new cave where no one's ever been is to dig across a level cross passage and break into an open or deeper passage.
Okay.
Steep, and that is what we did.
That makes sense. I was reading the history on your website, which I'll link to the podcast, but there was a period of time after your grandfather owned it where it exchanged hands, that it wasn't in the Cale family. And then you became owner. So talk a little bit about what inspired you to take on this as a project and as a calling.
Well, first, when I left home when I was 16 years old to join my grandfather in the development of the cave.
Okay.
And so I worked there up until I had to go to college my freshman year. And I my father was a minister in southern West Virginia. So I wound up going down to Concord College, now called Concord University. And of course, I couldn't stay away from caving. So the first thing I did as a freshman, my first month there, I founded a caving club. The first caving club in West Virginia. They never had a grotto. And so I named it the Concord Grotto. And it got about 30 members gathered together. That's the so I said, oh, there's neat caves around. I learned that all from the people that come up to Delaney's cave. I'd learned where all these caves were. So the Concord Grotto became official. And we went on to discover caves. And I found what a vertical cave may be the deepest or vertical cave in West Virginia. It went about 80 feet straight down. But I had to be rescued from that because I rappelled into it and then I couldn't get back up. So they had to pull me out. So even while going to my freshman year of college, I was still caving. So now as I'm ending that, we're coming back up to work with my grandfather. Now we have to open up. It's July 1 and we're in 1964. I took the first tour the day we opened and he made me the manager. And I was, and then he said 3 months after we opened, he sold the cave. And all of a sudden I didn't have a job. I didn't have anything. He helped me out with a little bit of money to go to college. My dad couldn't really afford to send me to college too well. He was having some financial problems. So I went to work for the new owners, and being that I knew where everything was, they made me the manager. That saved maybe that I was back into West Virginia University. And my doctorate is in the philosophy of science. I have a doctorate from Duquesne University. So I have this academic life paralleling the cave life. So my life essentially is basically science, teaching, being a professor.
What brought you back to the cavern and being the owner of the cavern?
I never left it because the whole time I'm doing that, I'm still also running Laurel Caverns because now I run it for the people who bought it. And then they were going to do a lot development there. They were preserving the cave. That was good. But they wanted to do a lot development on all the land around it, which was natural for the huge investment there. But it would have also very much affected the hydrology of the cave, the character of the cave, and it would have put it in the middle of this town, like a bare rock type of thing. So I got together with Don Shoemaker, who owned the Summit Inn. And Don was kind enough to see the idea of preserving that property. And so Don then financed a 25% ownership. Now, this is 1973 now. And he financed a 25% ownership for me. So, because I had no money. I mean, I ran it for them. I wasn't making any money teaching or anything else. It was like that. So, but I was the manager all those years. And I was also active during those same years. I was president of the Laurel Highlands Visitors Bureau, now called Go Laurel Highlands.
Hmm.
I was president of the Pennsylvania Attractions Association back when I was 25 years old. All those at the same years, going to doing the university stuff, being involved in all the state stuff with organizations and running Laurel Caverns. So all that was going on at the same time. Then in 1986, Don wanted to sell. And so I then, thanks again, Don helped co-sign for me to make the mortgage payments. I spent my whole life making mortgage payments. So in 1986, then, I was able to buy out Laurel Caverns from Don. And fortunately, by that time, I had also met a very wonderful woman named Lillian, who was a school teacher. She had brought a school field trip there in 1975, and we began dating, and we got married in 77. And so she's been my partner in running Laurel Caverns. Really made it possible for me to tootle off and be a college professor. She carried so much of the weight of the operation. She still works with it today, works especially as school field trips, but she handles many other things. She helps with the finance and everything like that. So she's been a real partner in the running of Laurel Caverns. And I look back on it, and I don't know that I could have possibly stayed as been a college professor, been there, had it not been for her being right there with me.
Yeah. And we'll recognize that it's good to have a partner both in life as well as really sharing your passion. One of the things when you talk about managing the caverns is I know that you mentioned that it's not open year round, even though we know that within a cave it's a pretty consistent temperature. But you're doing some things to conserve other inhabitants of the caverns. Can we talk a little bit about those other inhabitants and how you've been protecting them?
Sure can. The people had been going in the cave over the years. One of the big problems, the cave was first found in 1794. And we don't think the Native Americans knew about it. The entrance had to be kind of opened up. But evidently some bats were in there, or at least they began populating the cave shortly thereafter. But we had maybe 2,500 bats, maybe by 1960s, 70s when we opened. The problem was that and this I'm sure was going on for a long time, but I began to notice that people were harming the bats when they were in bat hibernation. They're not there in the summer. They're actually leaving now. We went in and did a count the other day. This is April 1st or 2nd right now, but every 2 bats were always found left in the cave right now. But all winter they're there. So Laurel Caverns, and I think I'm right on that because we were members of the National Caves Association. In the 1970s, early 1980s, became the first cave to shut down for bat hibernation. Nobody else does it anywhere in the United States, as far as I know. Woodward Cave now, and that's because the Game Commission had them do it. Basically, everybody else just went right through it. But in our case, with our caving and everything, we just did that. So that's why we were keeping that. And I'm so pleased to see, thanks to the Game Commission, thanks to the DCNR, that will still be honored, and the bats will be protected because we lost our population due to white nose syndrome. We can get it back. It's going to take a lot of years, but if we leave them alone, protect them, we can get that bat population restored.
What I understand with bat biology is that just your presence and disturbing them, they only have a limited amount of resources.
It wakes them up, fly around, burns up their energy.
Yes.
Then they starve to death, literally.
Yes. I saw my first bat 2 nights ago. I was out walking the dog and I saw my first bat of the year. So I was pretty excited.
They're coming back all along Chestnut Ridge. Chestnut Ridge is the first ridge of the Appalachian Mountains, and it's the first place that air has an uplift. And so the bats are coming and the bats and all these migrating species use Chestnut Ridge as a highway because of that uplift we have with that's why the windmills are a little bit of a threat to them on there.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's what they do back and forth. And so, our bats, they're not the local bats you see. Those are tree bats. They're different.
Yes.
Our cave bats take off down from for the Carolinas.
Yeah. I like bats. They do so much good for the environment, eating insects, pollinating, all sorts of fun things.
They're fantastic, yes.
Is there any story or legend either about the cave or that has stood out to you in your decades of being there as a young man, as a child, as a young man, as a manager that have stood out to you?
Well, the problem is that when you study the history, you know the history. It's rather relatively boring. I mean, it's nothing. It's just people going in. We have people lost in there as early as 1801. The popular legend of the cave is that it was used by this gang of robbers as a place to hide gold and all that sort of thing. That became popular. That was based on a book written in 1865 called White Rocks. And it referred to this robber's den but it has a story in there about this one person in the book getting lost in Delaney's cave. So people conflated the two and thought the cave, it was never used like that. Even in the 1860s, the cave was still a popular place for people to come. We had in 1816, John Paxton recorded that the walls of the cave were covered with names and initials.
Mm.
Even in 1816, one of the big projects I had was try to get a lot of that graffiti out of the cave, and also broken glass. People went in, they would smash bottles, and we got getting broken glass out of the cave. So we really don't have anything like that. For a long time, we thought that Native Americans had used the cave. We assumed that. We never found any artifacts near there, but we assumed that. But when Ryan was doing his research on the history of Laurel Caverns, he really dug deep into some of these early newspaper articles. And we found that when the cave was discovered, the discoverer had to literally dig through the sinkhole, all these leaves, to get to it. And even when he did, all he did was looking through tree roots in 1794. And there's an article that in 1797, somebody went up to the Delaney farm, went to the farmhouse and wanted to go see this cave that Delaney had found. And Delaney handed him an axe because he had to use an axe to hack through the tree roots to get into the cave entrance. But over the years, people broke all that away. Those trees sort of disappeared, and we preserve it.
Yeah. So lots of legends. So for people that are listening that have not been to Laurel Caverns, what would they expect to see? What would they expect on a visit to the caverns?
Well, what people expect to see is what every other cave in the United States looks like. There's this old line, well, you've seen one cave, you've seen them all. They expect to walk in, they expect to see stalactites, stalagmites, and everything like that. Laurel Caverns is more of a sandstone cave, a calcareous sandstone. Now, That's just a fancy way of saying it's sandstone with a lot of lime built into it. It's about 2/3 sand and 1/3 calcium carbonate. And what makes Laurel Caverns different is kind of what you can see behind me are the corrugations in the rock. In a normal cave, the walls are relatively straight or rocky, goes up, and then you have these nice formations of beautiful stalactites and stalagmites. In Laurel Caverns, the beauty is in the walls. The walls are all convoluted like this. And as a result, in the convolutions, that's where the real beauty of the cave is. To understand that, think of it like this. The rock was formed about 340 million years ago, give or take a month. We have them right around there somewhere. And in that period of time, so the sand from the ocean floor mixed with calcium in the sea life, corals, seashells. This may have been closer to a beach area. There's even some belief that it was aeolian. That just means it was windblown sand mixing with the calcium. But in any case, instead of the rock being uniform, calcium and sand, it's a combination. It's kind of mixture. It's lumpy. A little more calcium here, a little less calcium over here, a little more calcium over here, and more sand over here. Now, when the rock it starts out as a flat bed of rock. Then with the forming of the mountains, this flat bed of rock gets a tilt to it, like that. That's that slope we have going up the mountain.
Okay, like you were saying, you can see the top of the
right
Washington Monument. Yep.
It would be like, yes. So we have that big tilt up on the rock bed. And it developed these little hairline cracks in them. They're called joint lines. And then when the rain falls through the air, the rain picks up carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide plus water forms carbonic acid. Very, very mild. But it's able to seep into those crevices, especially when the rock was in the water table, when the mountain eroded down. got into the water table, and it began decaying the rock into sand. In others, it leached out the calcium carbonate, leaving behind the sand residue. In a normal cave, it's mostly calcium carbonate, so the void, the opening of the cave forms immediately. And then this water drips in and forms the stalactites. In Laurel Caverns, the normal status is to be clogged floor to ceiling with sand. And then the decayed rock is in the middle. So it's sand in the middle. And then the outside walls reflect the lumpiness of the ratio of the calcium to the sand. So where there is, like is in the picture I have behind me, where there is, I have the Sealer 6 in here. I know in this location right here that there was not much calcium. I mean, this calcium was not much here. So the rock decayed at a faster rate than here. But as I go up into here, I start to see that it's sticking out more. And that means there was more calcium in that period, more resistance to the decay process. And these convolutions very often form pockets and all kinds of odd shapes in the walls. And that's where part of Laurel Caverns has its beauty.
Nice. And that then goes back to when we started, you indicated that you had to excavate some sand to find these additional mileage.
That's right. So that's what I mean. Most of the cave, I think we have 20 miles of cave if all the sand were out of the cave. That's the thing. When we take out the sand, we see all those convolutions in the walls. If the cave had been formed by erosion, which is everyone's expectation, that wouldn't be the case. The walls would be, you would need the erosion to get all those forms. But it's not. It's a corrosion process. The erosion simply moves the sand. However, not very much of the sand in the cave has been really moved. We have huge areas, just mazes of passages clogged floor to ceiling with sand. So even though we have 4 miles of open cave, probably have another at least 4 times that much in passages clogged floor to ceiling with sand that are there.
So how much of the cave is open to the public? Somebody were to come visit, are they taken on a guided walk? What does the visitation process look like?
What we want to talk about are the ways in which the cave is set up for tours. It follows the slope of the mountain. And as a result, the cave passages, as the further down the mountain you get, the more challenging it is. So what we have the level 1 tours are the easy guided tours. You can go with a guide, no steps. We follow the traverse of the mountain, the level passages, and you can see you would walk about actually 2.5 football field lengths. It won't seem like it, but that's how far you walk, no steps, and you see all the upper maze. You see a lot of cave. Then we go to level 2. Now that's if you have good knees and you can walk 153 steps. Now that takes you down 15 stories down, over, back up again. And you see a lot of big passages. That Hole of the Mountain King I talked about earlier that I found when I first went into.
Yes.
The Grand Canyon Passage. We have Calico Falls, the 45-foot high waterfalls. So you see a lot more going down 15 stories. Now, let's suppose you're even more adventurous and you want to do some of the crawling. You want to see some of all these, because we only show our whole cave. You're not seeing the lighted part of the cave. It is probably only maybe a mile of cave, mile out of 4 miles lit up. The rest of it, it's a lot more cave. So you want to see some of those crawl passages and some of the other caving passages. So then we have what we call tour and crawl. That's our 3rd level. And that takes you down into a little further down into a lot of the side passages. And then there you have to wear old clothes, and we give you a light, hard hat and everything. And then we go to the 4th level, and that takes you down 25 stories down.
Ooh.
Okay, and you're down to what we call the ballroom, the bat room, some of the larger rooms further down, totally in the original state, just like they were 100 years ago. And then for the ones who really, really want to go all the way down, we take them 45 stories down to the bottom, as far down as the stream goes, to where it disappears. And the stream doesn't come out to a location another 15 stories down further down the mountain. That's where you get the Washington Monument is 55 stories tall. The cave from the top to the bottom is over about 65 stories. So in elevation difference.
So you call it the tour de crawl. So for once you're getting to like levels 3, 4, 5, is it in low passages? So you are literally crawling?
Actually,
More
the
or less.
further down you go, the bigger it gets.
Interesting.
In the upper part, you're seeing the smallest passages of the cave. The further you go, the bigger and bigger and bigger. When you get to the biggest rooms of the cave aren't in our lighted cave. That's another thing unique about Laurel Caverns. On the guided tours, they show their biggest rooms. At Laurel Caverns, you have to wear old clothes, we supply the lights. You have to wear shoes, hiking boots with a 1/4-inch tread, lace above the ankles, and to be prepared to hike down 25 stories or down 45 stories to really see the big stuff. And you're going to see it just the way it was 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago.
So I imagine on your website, there is like, if you're planning to do the deeper caverns, these are the things you need to do because you can't just show up in the summer on your shorts and your flip-flops thinking that you're going to go down.
That's right. So we have cave for every level. We can take you in a wheelchair down. We're not legally accessible because of the absolute criteria. We can't be. But when somebody comes in, especially children where they're lighter, easier to work with, we can get them down in a wheelchair all through that upper easy part.
Nice.
We can do that. But the lower part where the steps are, no, we can't do that.
And are there picnic facilities or things for people?
We have picnic tables outside. The state we had a picnic shelter. They'll be replacing it someday. But right now we do have picnic tables outside.
Well, you mentioned the state. So the cavern is going into its next phase of life, and it will be the 125th State Park in Pennsylvania, and it will be the first underground state park. So what are your hopes for the caverns in this next phase of its being?
Well, the whole idea of having the cave as a state park is to preserve it. And my vision for the property from the very beginning was a state park vision. My father, as I said, is a minister in southern West Virginia. We lived in a little town called Bramwell, at the very southern bottom of West Virginia. And outside there was a place called Pinnacle Rock State Park. And we'd go up there. There's a big rock we used to climb at. And they had all the picnic shelter there and the tables. And it was very rustic and very nice. So when we started doing the development of Laurel Caverns, I was coming out of that environment there. And I just saw the property sort of lending itself to being a kind of like a state park, not being a state park, but that was my vision for it. And I remember when my grandfather wanted we needed a sign at the entrance. And he saw the price of getting this big painted sign. And he thought, well, that's a lot of money. And I told him, I said, I'll make you a sign for $10.
Enterprising lad.
These are professional sign makers. And you're going to tell me you're going to make me a sign? No, you can't. So anyway, but fortunately, my grandfather, he was an accountant and he was not there all the time. So I got to work. I cut down. So I got some logs. I cut them. I notched them up, put 2 vertical logs, notched log across the top, a little chain down. I had 2x6s. I didn't have a router, but I did have with a screwdriver and a hammer. I chiseled out using the letters and on the thing. And I had Laurel Caverns, and the waterboard had an arrow, and I painted them yellow, just like the state parks. So I made a sign look just like the West Virginia State Park sign entrance.
Do you still have the sign?
What's that? No. I wish I'd saved it now, but
yes.
In those days I didn't think like that. So my granddad comes up and he looks at that and he says, I said, there's a $10 sign. And he said, well, I guess it'll do for now. And so, okay. Well, then he sold the property and the new owners kept it. They let me, they saw that too. And so we stayed there, and it stayed there for about 4 years. And then we wanted to put up a larger, newer sign, which became a big concrete sign eventually that I also designed for that. So that was there. Yeah. So I had this vision all along. Well, so as each owner came along, and that was where the people my grandfather sold it to, they had a different vision for the property. They didn't see a state park. They saw a ski resort with combination where the cave was more of a summer activity, and with lot sales all around it. But Don Shoemaker he was into the idea of preserving it. We didn't really use the word state park, but preserving it in accord with its own history. And that meant preserving all the land in accord with its own history.
Yeah.
And that was very important to me. And a lot of people said, Dave, I could put $1 million in your pocket, or people can come up and do a lot development. People wanted to buy lots, then I wouldn't sell it. I kept everything just like it was. I never really, but I was chairman of the Pennsylvania Travel Council in the 1990s when Tom Ridge was governor. And so I interacted a lot with the state government. And that's when I began working with members of the DCNR to got the discussion going. But it wasn't until, and really we were still in discussions when John Hallis calls me up and said, hey, David, the governor put it into his budget. Now we're donating the land. So he didn't need the money to give me any money. Happy to donate it. And I said, well, with that, then we just have to make it happen. And that's where it went. So that's kind of what it is. So I'm happy to, fortunately, the world's been good to me, and I'm financially in a situation where I can say, Lily and I can just donate it because, in a way, this is part of her heritage too, so
right.
She's part of that donation too. I wouldn't be able to do it without her permission. She's been supportive of that, and that's wonderful.
And that's very generous of both of you. And you've spent so many years being a caretaker of this special place, and not just of the caverns, but of its denizens, of the visitors, of exciting people about geology and place. And then to be able to continue that as a state park, that's very generous. And I want to thank you personally. I also want to thank you on behalf of the residents of the Commonwealth, both today and in future generations. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Marci.
So we're getting ready to wrap up. If there's one thing you'd like to leave with the listeners, either about the caverns or your connection to the outdoors or a message for the future, what would that be?
My message would be this. Now, remember, you're coming from the point of view of someone in science. All right.
Right.
Use it for recreation. Use it for learning of the geology, but also use it for a lab. Universities can use it. There's all kinds of experiments. We can experiment with how best to preserve bats. We can preserve it and use it to study how best to restore bat populations. Yeah. So there's a lot of science there.
I think about Velcro. That was somebody observing how hitchhikers grab onto your clothes.
That came right out of nature. Yes.
Yes. So there is, you're right. There's a lot of ways that if we study natural systems, study other beings, we can learn.
I'll tell you, just to add, if you don't mind, what Carnegie Mellon was doing there. One of their things, they also experimented with drones. And they came into the cave, and they had these little drones which worked like little bats. And the drones would see the cave just like bats could see the cave. And they would go and they'd put these little statues, little plastic items, different things on little ledges in the cave. And then the drones were programmed. And those little drones went out from their control center, which we have in the cave. And they would go out, find those little items, look for them, find them, pick them up off the ledges, and bring them back to the people working. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
That was done research was done at Laurel Caverns, working with Carnegie Mellon University. That is what I would like to see us going forward with in the future. Things like that.
Yeah. Well, David, it's been wonderful to have this conversation with you. And I
doing it with you.
Yeah. And again, thank you and Lillian for your generosity and for your being a caretaker of this special place. And we're going to meet in person in a couple of days. And I'm very excited to meet you in person and to be a part of the celebration. So,
and thank you for honoring us for being a part of your podcast. We appreciate that.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for listening to Think Outside, where every episode invites you to discover new places, build confidence, and find inspiration in nature. Love the show? Subscribe for more inspiration, share with a fellow explorer, and let's keep thinking outside together. For more resources and inspiration, visit thinkoutsidePodcast.org.